Hello again, this is Alexis Carter, and this lecture is on Section 4A, Leadership Models, Processes, and Practices. This lecture marks the beginning of Section 4 of the core content. This slide highlights the topics that will be covered in this particular lecture, but I would like to note at this time that Section 4 as a whole covers a lot of very soft topics in clinical informatics. As such, it can be one of the most difficult sections to prepare for in a board exam. Many of the concepts in Section 4 have no less than a multitude of theories behind them, but I have distilled the theories down to those specifically mentioned in the core content as well as those most often referenced or applicable to healthcare. Each of the subtopics in Section 4.1 are prefaced with an appropriately named divider slide for easy reference and study. We're going to start with dimensions of effective leadership. First, we'll start with the definition of leadership. Leadership is defined as the power or ability to lead other people. It's also been referenced as the capacity to lead or the act or instance of leading. While the previous slide was the dictionary definition of leadership, leadership has also been defined as both a behavior and a process. Leadership behavior is when an individual is directing the activities of a group towards a shared goal, and the process of leadership is when an individual influences a group of people toward the realization of that shared goal. Now, while in this lecture we will only be covering certain aspects of leadership, you should be aware that all of the skills in Section 4 of the core content relate to leadership. Moving on to leadership theories. For most of us, leadership theories aren't necessarily on the forefront of our daily activities as we engage as leaders in our organizations. Having said that, theories and models make great fodder for board exam questions. There are many theories on what makes great leaders and what makes for great leadership. If you walk into any bookstore or search for leadership in an online bookseller's website, there are more theories on leadership than anyone could possibly hope to remember or read. While there are too many individual theories to count, most leadership theories can be classified into one of 8 major types. So for the board exam, I would focus your efforts in understanding these 8 major types of leadership theories. Leadership theories developed over time, and the major categories of leadership theories differ not only by content but also by time of origin. The first category, known as the Great Man theories, developed originally around the 1840s. In this group of theories, leaders were assumed to be born rather than made. An individual was predestined to lead or a natural-born leader, and if they were not born that way, then it was assumed that the individual would never be a leader. The second set of leadership theories developed in the 1930s to 40s, and these are known as the trait theories. These leadership theories state that people are born with leadership qualities that will cause them to naturally excel as leaders, and it's in this category where we see the first recognition that even individuals who naturally excel in this area might benefit from additional training. Behavioral theories came about in the 1940s and 50s and progressed to state that anyone with behavioral conditioning could become a leader. In this group of theories are the first recognitions that leaders are made rather than born, and this is effectively opposite from the Great Man and trait theories above. Contingency theories came about in the 1960s, and here is where you start to see recognition of leadership styles and recommendations for leaders to flex their leadership style contingent upon the situation. These theories recognize that no single leadership style is appropriate for all situations, and the success of your leadership will depend upon the degree of fit between the style applied and the situation. Situational theories are very similar to contingency theories and were developed at approximately the same time. However, while contingency theories were more prescriptive about leadership styles that must be used in certain situations, situational theories indicate that leaders should have flexibility in determining or choosing a leadership style based on multiple situational variables to help facilitate decision-making. Participative theories state that the ideal leader takes the input of others into account before decisions are made, and that the leader encourages participation and collaboration among members of the team. These theories also suggest that this type of leadership will lead to better decisions and more success. Transactional theories, which are also known as management theories or exchange theories, were developed in the 1970s, and these theories indicated that leaders should engage in transactions with their team members. The transactions can be rewards or they can be punishments, and these theories focus on the leader's role in supervision, organization, and group performance. Lastly, the transformational or relationship theories were also developed in the 1970s, and these theories focus on the connections between leaders and their followers. Theories in this category generally expect leaders to transform their followers by inspiring them and increasing their motivation. Among all of the leadership theories in my research on this topic, there was only one theory which specifically related to healthcare, and that was the functional results-oriented healthcare leadership model. I've included the references for this model at the bottom of the slide. This leadership model, again, was developed specifically for healthcare, and it is a transactional theory with rewards and punishments where the leader is focused on getting the team to generate results. The next topic we will cover is leadership styles. Leadership styles are behavioral styles that leaders engage in during leadership activities, and you should note that there are significant areas of overlap here with conflict modes, which we will discuss later in this lecture. In this slide, you can see that there are a number of different leadership styles. We will go through the leadership styles in more detail in the next few slides, but I've put this slide in to show you the relationship of the different styles to each other based on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, in this case represented by the left end of the spectrum on this slide, the leader is the only person on the team who leads. At the opposite end of the spectrum, in this case on this slide, the right end of the spectrum, the leader is a passive participant in the team and the followers do all of the leading. It's important to note that there is no such thing as a good or bad leadership style. However, leadership styles can be appropriately or inappropriately applied to various situations, and some leadership styles are more appropriate for everyday usage than others. I've referenced a Harvard Business Review article at the bottom of this slide in which Daniel Goleman states, "Research has shown that leaders with the best results do not rely only on one leadership style. They use most of them in a given week." So as we go through the leadership styles in the next several slides, bear that in mind. In the next 3 slides, we will cover the leadership styles from the leader leads or left end of the spectrum on the previous slide to the followers lead on the right end of the spectrum on the previous slide. In order to facilitate your study, I have created a chart which demonstrates the similarities and differences between the different styles, as well as the advantages and disadvantages of each one. It's important to realize that each of these leadership styles can be helpful or useful in certain situations, and that there are no bad leadership styles, but rather leadership styles that can be improperly applied. In the first leadership style, which is the autocratic or otherwise known as the coercive style, this is at the extreme end of the spectrum where the leader believes that they know best and communication flows downwards to the team. The leader behaviors typically are do what I say, they're very controlling and directive, they make all decisions and they solve all problems. Now, this is not a leadership style that you want to use on a day-to-day regular basis. However, this particular leadership style works very well in the middle of emergencies or when you are working with problem employees. However, if you make the mistake of applying this leadership style on your daily activities in non-emergency situations, this can inhibit the flexibility of your employees and can dampen their motivation. The end result can be hostility and rebellion. One step away from autocratic is the pace-setting leadership style. In this leadership style, the leader sets the pace for the rest of the team, and the leader ensures that he or she meets and or exceeds the pace that is set for the rest of the group. This leadership style can be very useful when you need to get quick results from a highly motivated team, and setting a pace for highly motivated employees can have a positive impact on them. However, if you have a less motivated team, this leadership style can have a negative impact because employees may feel overwhelmed by the leader's demands for excellence. The next leadership style is bureaucratic. In the bureaucratic style, much as the name implies, the leader insists that everything is done according to policy and procedure. In this leadership style, the leader is acting more like a police officer than a leader. Having said that, this leadership style can be useful for teams that are required to perform repetitive tasks with a high degree of accuracy, particularly when failure to follow protocol can result in a dangerous situation. Improperly applied, this leadership style can cause employees to lose motivation and to do only what is required of them. Further into the spectrum, we see the authoritative style. In the authoritative style, the leader states the goal but allows the members of the team the freedom to choose how they achieve the goal. This leadership style works very well when the leader is an expert in the area in which the team is working, and it is generally viewed as one of the most strongly positive styles when used on a regular basis. However, if this style is used when a leader is working with a team of people who are more expert than the leader is, this style does not work well at all. In the transformational leadership style, the leader focuses on inspiring and motivating the team members. In this style, the leader must effectively communicate the vision, positively influence attitudes of the team members towards the mission, and bring the group to share a sense of the mission. Leaders using this style must consider and address each follower's concerns or doubts about the project, and the combination of these efforts results in one of the most strongly positive styles to use on a regular basis. This style is particularly effective when the business is adrift or when a new vision or clear direction is needed, and there are no significant disadvantages to the use of this style. The consultative or coaching style, like the name implies, is when the leader acts as a coach to the members of the team. The leader teaches the team the best concepts to use while trying to achieve the shared goal, and the goal of the leader is to help develop people for the future. This leadership style works very well when employees are already aware of their own weaknesses and want to improve them, and this style also has the advantage of increasing the knowledge of the employees in the longer term. However, this style does not work well when employees are not motivated or are resistant to changing. As seen in the last slide and also in this slide, there is overlap between certain leadership styles and the major leadership theory categories that we described earlier. Specifically, the transformational leadership style and the democratic or participative leadership style have overlap with their respective leadership theory categories. The democratic or participative or collaborative leadership style is a style in which the leader tries to ensure that every member has input into the project. This leadership style focuses on open and mutual communication, encouraging the active participation of the team members, and in sharing knowledge and reducing complexity. The advantages of this style are that by enabling the team members, organizational flexibility is increased, decisions are informed and consensus-based, and interdependency among stakeholders is facilitated. This leadership style is best applied in low-key clinical settings, research, or healthcare policy settings that don't require quick decisions to be made. Improperly applied, employees can feel leaderless with this leadership style, and teams may not be able to resolve situations in a timely manner. The distributed leadership style is where leadership responsibilities are distributed among complementary members of a team. The leader and team members complement each other's strengths and weaknesses, and this style works well when members of the group may be more expert than the leader. In the shared leadership style, the leader empowers the followers to make decisions. Toyota Lean methodology espouses the regular application of a shared leadership style. This leadership style works very well in healthcare because many healthcare workers are quite autonomous, and it works best for small, rapid improvement projects, and it allows the followers to demonstrate leadership behavior, greater autonomy, and improved outcomes. However, in the wrong context, this leadership style may result in incorrect decisions, and certainly is not a style that you would want to apply during a time of crisis. And finally, these last two leadership styles represent the extreme end where the followers lead the team rather than the leader. In the servant or affiliative leadership style, the leader's responsibility is to create harmony and to build emotional bonds between the team members. Leaders are expected to have a moral core and to serve others, especially the underprivileged. The advantages of this style are that the leader builds harmony among team members, increases morale, and can heal emotional rifts that may be in the team. However, this leadership style can also allow poor performing employees to go uncorrected or leave conflicts to be unresolved. Lack of advice to the followers may make the followers feel leaderless, and this leadership style frequently lacks speed. In the laissez-faire leadership style, the leadership responsibilities are assumed completely by the group, and the leader is passive and non-directive. There are really no advantages to this leader style, unless, of course, one is trying to communicate that they no longer want to be a leader, in which case it might be quite useful. However, the effect of this leadership style is that employees become apathetic and the shared goal is not reached. Among the leadership styles, there is an example of a healthcare specific leadership style, and that is the collaborative healthcare leadership style. Again, this is the collaborative, democratic, or participative leadership style. This leadership style and model was developed by the Center for Creative Leadership. I have referenced the website on the slide, and contains 6 parts, as you can see on the slide. Moving on to leadership development models. A leadership development model is a model that describes the stages that a person must go through in order to develop into a good leader. There is only one model that is specific to healthcare leadership. The Healthcare Quality Professional Leadership Development Model is one that states that a leader must go through 6 progressive stages of development in order to become a good leader. Importantly, the first stage is professionalism and professional values. From there, the leader progresses into self-development and management, communication, performance improvement, organizational awareness, and fostering of positive change. So in this model, professionalism and professional values are the foundation of what a leader must attain in order to progress through the other stages. In the area of assessing leadership competency, there are a couple of tools that you should be aware of that can be used to assess the competency of a healthcare leader. The first is the Health Leadership Competency Model. This is a model put forth by the National Center for Healthcare Leadership, and it is built upon the premise that leadership is at the hub of 3 activities, which are transformation, execution, and people. Section L12 of this competency model specifically references leadership in information technology. I've included the references for you there so that you can examine those specific competencies. The next leadership competency tool is the one put forward by the American College of Healthcare Executives. In this tool, there are 5 domains with leadership at the center. However, under business skills and knowledge, this competency tool also includes information management competencies. Again, I have included the reference here so that you can examine those competencies. At this point, we will shift into governance. Whereas leadership is a person leading a group, governance is a group leading one or more groups. In health information technology projects, governance has been further defined as the infrastructure, strategies, and approaches to support physicians in the definition of clinical content, refinement of the care processes, and adoption of new technologies before, during, and after implementation. Just as there are theories for leadership, there are also theories for corporate governance. The agency governance theory states that good governance comes from an emphasis from the governing body on conformance of the subordinate groups. Governing entities should focus on monitoring, and this governance theory really diminishes a governing board's role in setting strategy, mission, or objectives. The stewardship governance theory states that the governing board's role is to develop strategy but not to monitor or enforce. So in a way, the stewardship theory is completely opposite to the agency theory. However, improper application of this type of governance can lead to failure, strategic drift, or inertia of the organization. Resource dependency governance theories states that the board's role is really to minimize uncertainty for the organization by creating dependencies on internal rather than external resources. The governing entity provides advice, information, and access to resources, but this governing style can be too overtly focused on reducing the impact of external issues on the organization. Lastly, the stakeholder governance theory states that governance occurs through the inclusion of a range of stakeholders. The governing entity's responsibility is to ensure that all groups are represented and that competing priorities are balanced. This type of governance can be extremely risk-averse, and decisions can be time-consuming. Within the topic of governance, it's important to understand the responsibilities as well as the authority of a governing entity. The responsibilities of a governing entity are those tasks and functions that the governance structure are required to complete in order to be successful. Below are 3 papers specifically referencing healthcare governance, and as you can see, there are slightly different perspectives on responsibilities for a governing entity between the 3 papers. With regard to authority, it's important to realize that in a governance structure, only the governing body as a whole has the authority to carry out its responsibilities. Individual board members or members of the governing entity do not have the authority to perform its functions. This is typically why governing bodies require a quorum of voting members before decisions can be made. All right, let's pause for a second to answer the following question. Governance for health information technology systems addresses all of the following needs, except which of the following? Managing change, communication, vendor system design, or medical staff bylaws. The correct answer is D. Governance for health information technology systems does not address medical staff bylaws. In contrast, health information technology governance does address managing change, communication, and vendor system design. Medical staff bylaws expand well beyond the purview of health information technology, and therefore the governance structure may have no authority over the specific content of these bylaws. Let's do another question. All of the following are corporate governance theories except goal-directed, stewardship, resource dependency, stakeholder. The correct answer is goal-directed. Goal-directed is not a corporate governance theory. Stewardship, resource dependency, and stakeholder are all corporate governance theories described earlier. The next section is negotiation and conflict management. First, we're going to start with negotiation. Negotiation is the process by which 2 or more parties with different interests or perspectives attempt to reach agreement. The styles and strategies that one might use during negotiation are very similar to those that can be used for conflict management. When parties are engaged in a healthy debate, negotiation can be used, but when the parties are engaged in conflict, then conflict management styles and strategies should be implemented. There are many negotiation books out there, but the classic book on negotiation is Getting to Yes, that was published in 1991. In negotiation, it is commonly recognized that if you fail to prepare for a negotiation, then you need to prepare to fail at negotiation. In the negotiation process, it is very important to focus on interests rather than positions. So a position is what someone wants, but the interest is why the person wants it. You may have heard that anytime you're facing a situation, it's always important to ask the 5 whys to get at the root cause of a problem. And in negotiation, this can be a very important strategy. An example of where focusing on interests help to resolve an issue much faster and definitely cheaper is on the right-hand side of the slide. In this example, a blood bank requested the implementation of a server immediately to help them manage their quality control, and the reason stated was because they were missing doing additional workups on abnormal or unexpected blood type findings. By asking the series of why and how and what questions below, a different outcome was achieved, which was faster, cheaper, and more reliable was arrived at, to the satisfaction of both the blood bank and the laboratory information system team. In the middle of the negotiation process, as with communicating in general, it's very important to frame the discussion. How you say it is just as important as what you say. The negotiator must also realize that all parties to the negotiation may not be at the table, and those parties not at the table may be a driving influence to the success or failure of the negotiation. As we progress from negotiation to conflict management, it's helpful to understand the differences between healthy debate and conflict. In healthy debate, people are open to hearing others' ideas, they listen and respond to those ideas even if they don't agree with them, and they try to understand the views of others. Generally speaking, in healthy debate, participants in a discussion stay objective and focus on the facts, and frequently the participants try a systematic approach to the situation and its resolution. In conflict, by contrast, the participants often assume that they're right and everyone else is wrong. People will state their ideas without responding to others' ideas, and there is no interest in other people's points of view. In conflict, you will frequently see personal attacks, blaming, and hot topics will often get thrashed out in an unstructured way, such that people can go off on tangents and don't come back to the original topic at hand. In conflict management, it's often important to understand the common sources of conflict because mitigating the source may help lead to resolution. Common sources of a conflict include individualistic behavior within an organization, poor communication, organizational structures which facilitate rather than reduce conflict, inter-individual conflicts, which often may be personal, and intergroup conflicts. There are different modes of handling conflict, and similar to leadership styles, each conflict mode can be beneficial within certain situations. The Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument is a series of questions that a person can answer to understand what their native mode of conflict is. For example, when an individual finds themselves in conflict with another person or group, what is their most natural tendency to handle that conflict? There are 5 general modes of handling conflict, and by understanding your own and the other conflict modes, you may be able to flex conflict modes depending on the situation. The first conflict mode is competing or forcing, in which an individual pursues his or her own concerns at the expense of others. The collaborating or problem-solving conflict mode is when an individual attempts to get a win-win situation out of the conflict. Compromising conflict modes prompt an individual to look for compromises where both parties may get some of what they want but typically don't get other pieces of what they want. The avoiding or withdrawing conflict mode means that the individual does not address the conflict at all, and the accommodating conflict mode means that the individual neglects his or her own concerns in order to satisfy the concerns of other people. This is the opposite of the competing or forcing conflict mode. There are general rules to follow for managing conflict, and the facilitative conflict management process was put out by the American Association of Medical Colleges. This process begins by clarifying the issue to be resolved, having rules or appropriate norms in place, particularly regarding good behavior, setting a time frame for the discussion, especially an end time, explaining the process that will be used to manage the conflict, analyze the facts of the situation and try to keep the emotions out of it, generate a range of possible solutions for the parties to consider, and then have the parties evaluate those solutions and make a plan to implement the highest ranked solution. Moving on now to collaboration. As a leadership tool, collaboration is a process whereby the leader considers and attempts to meet the needs of all parties involved in a process. Collaboration is based on a premise that cooperation is necessary in order to achieve an effective outcome. Collaboration is particularly helpful when you need to consider a variety of viewpoints and when there have been previous conflicts in a group or organization that may have been left out of decision-making processes. Collaboration is also helpful when multiple stakeholders are involved and each of those stakeholders needs to meet the needs of their own subgroups. The next section is on motivation. First, we'll start with the definition. Motivation is defined as the desire of an individual to behave in certain ways. However, motivation can also be defined from the perspective of organizations. So for organizations, motivation is a behavioral, affective, and cognitive process that influences the willingness of workers to perform their duties in order to achieve not only personal but organizational goals, and it influences the extent and level of their effectiveness at work. There are two basic types of motivation, extrinsic and intrinsic. An individual is extrinsically motivated when he or she performs an action or task in order to receive an external reward, such as money, an incentive, or a promotion. By contrast, an individual is intrinsically motivated when his or her actions or tasks are performed for internal fulfillment or enjoyment of the activity itself. An example of intrinsic motivation is the sense of satisfaction you get from accomplishing a goal. Research has shown that when you try to motivate someone to perform certain actions or tasks, it's important to focus on intrinsic motivation more so than extrinsic motivation. Now, many of us may use extrinsic motivating factors because generally these are easier to accomplish, but when they are used predominantly or solely to motivate others, this can lead to low trust and it can actually undermine any efforts that you may put forth to intrinsically motivate your team members. Intrinsic motivation, by contrast, is linked to more positive health worker behaviors. Workers tend to enjoy their work more, their work is performed at higher quality, and your retention of health workers in their current jobs is higher. Like many other concepts in Section 4 as a whole, there are a number of theories surrounding motivation and how it works. There are many theories on motivation as well as more categories of motivation theories than I have listed here. However, these three categories have some of the most commonly referenced motivation theories in healthcare. These include the humanistic theories, socio-cognitive theories, and cognitive theories. I've provided a web link at the bottom of the page if you want to dive into this in more detail. I've provided examples of the different theories within each category, and we will briefly touch on each one of these. Self-determination theory is a humanistic theory of motivation, which states that self-determination is achieved by intrinsic motivation, and intrinsic motivation is achieved through autonomy, competence, and relatedness. In other words, if an individual does not feel that they have autonomy to make decisions, that they do not have competence to make changes, and they don't feel a sense of relatedness to the people around them, then their ability to be intrinsically motivated is diminished. In the example that I've provided, where you're trying to get a patient to change his or her behavior, autonomy represents the level of intrinsic motivation that a patient has to change their behavior. Let's say if they're trying to quit smoking. The patient's confidence in their ability to make that change, to quit smoking, is their level of competence. And their relatedness has to do with their perception of whether they are relating to other people by being respected by them, understood, and cared for. Hertzberg's theory is another humanistic theory of motivation which focuses on motivating employees. Hertzberg theory is also known as the motivator hygiene theory or the two-factor theory. Between the motivator factors and the hygiene factors, you will probably be able to see some correlates between intrinsic motivators and extrinsic motivators. Motivator factors are considered to be more powerful in motivating individuals. You'll notice that there are a lot of similarities here between motivator factors and intrinsic motivators. Hygiene factors, on the flip side, are predominantly composed of extrinsic motivators, and use of hygiene factors in the workplace leads to an overall decreased satisfaction among the employees. Maslow's theory of motivation is the last humanistic theory we will discuss. Maslow's theory states that only unsatisfied needs will motivate an individual, but certain categories of needs have to be addressed in sequence, starting from physiologic needs all the way up to self-actualizing needs. Once the needs at one level have been met, the individual is then motivated to satisfy the needs in the next level up in the pyramid, and the levels have to be addressed in sequence. So, for example, an individual who only has their physiologic needs met but does not have their safety needs met, such as an employee who may have an unsafe situation at home, such individuals will struggle to be motivated to satisfy their needs for morality, creativity, and spontaneity, because this would be jumping several levels in the pyramid. Moving on now to the sociocognitive theories of motivation. The social cognitive theory of motivation states that an individual's learning and motivation to learn is directly related to personal factors, behavior, and environmental factors, which are assisted by individual observation, the ability to learn through imitation, the influences of the individual's own thoughts, and the influences of the individual's learning environment. The self-efficacy theory states that a person's motivation is tied to their perception of their ability to perform appropriately or to reach a goal. You'll notice some overlap here with the self-determination theory that we discussed previously. In the self-efficacy theory, motivation occurs via a contiguous cycle, an example of which is shown on the right-hand side of the screen, but you should also note that cycles can be positive towards motivation or can unmotivate an individual if they are not successful. The last sociocognitive theory of motivation that we will cover is goal theory. Goal theory was developed by Edwin Locke, and it states that in order to motivate an individual, the individual must have goals which provide clarity, some level of challenge, and task complexity, as well as require a commitment from the individual to complete the task. Feedback on task performance is also helpful for motivation. What's interesting about goal theory is that, as you can see in the graph to the right of the slide, this theory states that an individual's performance on a particular task is related to the level of difficulty of that task. If the task is too simple, performance is poor, and similarly, if the task is too difficult, performance is also poor. However, if the task difficulty is set to be high but not too high, individuals have the best performance. Goal theory is also the theory that espoused the term SMART goals. I think many of you have heard of these. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound are the descriptors that have to belong to a goal in order to make it a SMART goal. We're now going to move to cognitive theories of motivation, the first of which is attribution theory. Attribution theory is a theory of why we attribute outcome X to causal factor Y, and this often happens via automatic thought processes. There are two main categories of factors that influence our attribution. The first are dispositional versus situational factors. Dispositional factors are internal to a person. This is his or her disposition or their motivation. Situational factors are external to a person and are the situation. The second category of factors are stable versus unstable factors. Obviously, stable means that these are factors which are unlikely to change soon, as opposed to unstable, which is the opposite. So, factors which are both stable and dispositional might include a person's intelligence, their general personality, their judgment, and their willpower. Dispositional but unstable factors might be a person's moods, how much effort they plan to exert, whether or not they're having some kind of momentary whim. Situational factors which are stable typically are institutional factors, economics, and social structures that are part of the culture. Situational but unstable factors might include coincidence, the weather, good luck, or bad luck. There are two additional concepts in attribution theory which are worthwhile to know. The first is controllability. Controllability is our perception of how well we can control a situation, and that influences our attitudes towards that situation. If we have more control over a situation, our attitude tends to be more positive, and the opposite is true if we have less control over the situation. Fundamental attribution error is a term that was conceived in attribution theory upon the observation that when individuals succeed at something, they tend to attribute their success to dispositional or internal factors. However, when those same individuals fail, perhaps at the same action or task, those same individuals tend to attribute failure to situational factors or factors which are external to themselves. And the last theory of motivation that will be discussed in this lecture, which is also a cognitive theory of motivation, is the expectancy value theory. Expectancy value theory states that an individual must have expectancy followed by instrumentality and followed by valence in order for them to be motivated to complete a task. Expectancy means that the individual expects that any effort that they put forth towards the task will result in high performance. Instrumentality means that the person has confidence that their performance will lead to the desired outcomes. And finally, valence means that the individual has to consider the outcomes desirable in order to be motivated to complete the task. So let's consider the following question. When considering how best to increase the motivation of an employee to engage in changing to a new EHR using Hertzberg's theory of motivation, which of the following factors would be most important to include? Increasing the employee's pay and benefits, giving the employee increased responsibility for the conversion, ensuring that the employee's work is covered by company policy, or reassuring the employee that his or her job is secure? And the answer is B, give the employee increased responsibility for the conversion. Responsibility is one of the motivator factors which were listed in the prior slide. By contrast, employee pay, benefits, actions being covered by company policy, and certainly reassuring the employee that his or her job is secure are hygiene factors in Hertzberg's theory. Now we're going to move on to decision making. We will only be discussing decision making briefly in this section because we will cover it in more detail in section 4B. There are certain traits to effective decision making. First, everyone has to be clear on the purpose of making the decision, and people with the power to make the decision must be present. In addition, people must understand and follow the decision making approach or the rules associated with decision making, and all ideas, when they're viewed as equally important, can help ensure that you're not missing critical information that might influence a decision. It's important to prevent domination by a single party, and any deadlocks in decision-making should be examined and resolved. At the end of the decision-making process, there should be a clear decision and a clear action plan. In decision-making, there are various levels of empowerment when there is more than one person making a decision. Again, this represents a spectrum where at one end, management makes a decision and then informs the staff impacted by that decision. And that progresses all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum where the employees make the decision and act upon it and inform the management later. Just as there is a spectrum of empowerment in decision-making, there's also a spectrum of methods that can be used to help make a decision. In unilateral decision-making, one person is making the decision. The advantages are that this is very fast and there is clear accountability. The obvious disadvantages are that there's a lack of input and buy-in from the individuals who might be impacted by that decision. This decision-making method is best applied when one person is the expert and is accountable. Majority voting is a method that should be used when there is a single option to decide on. This also has the advantage of being very fast. You can engage in dialogue before the vote, and there is a clear outcome. However, this decision-making method can be too fast in some situations. Some members of the group may feel that there are winners versus losers, and in some cases, no dialogue may be allowed. Majority voting is best applied when you have yes-no decisions to make and when the options are clear. Compromise has the advantage of ensuring that discussion occurs between all of the parties. However, each of the parties involved will get some of what they want, but not get other aspects of what they want. This can lead in some cases to adversarial behavior. Compromise is good to use when positions are polarized or when the likelihood of a single consensus that everyone is happy with is improbable. Multi-voting, which is different from majority voting, is when you are rank ordering multiple different solutions based on a set of criteria. The advantage of this decision-making method is that it is very systematic and objective. Everyone in the group can participate, and it can feel like a win even when the solution that you desired was not chosen in the end. However, this decision-making method can limit the amount of dialogue, and it can hide the real priorities or interests that certain parties may have regarding the decision. This decision-making method is best applied when there are many possible solutions to choose from. The last decision-making method is consensus building. This is a very collaborative approach and systematic, but it is also very slow and requires a certain set of data and skills that some groups may not natively have. This method is best applied to very important issues when total and complete buy-in is needed from your team members for the success of the project. Here are some additional references on decision-making theories, and that's a wrap for this lecture. There are some additional suggested readings on the next slide.